Good morning, Joe Winberg, Bluebird Semaphore. And today I'm going to continue my discussion on Western Europe. I think I started one discussion, maybe two, and this is going to be World History for Ordinary People 47. And like I said, it'll be identified as Western Europe. Although, in this discussion, I am going to talk about Singapore, because it appears to me that Singapore is one of the most important British colonies. And where I'm starting with the Western Europe is the British Isles, so that would include England and Ireland. So for some reason I wanted to jump right into Singapore. Maybe it has to do with my interest in the war in the Pacific. And if I was paying attention, I would know that there's an awful lot going on in the Pacific right now. And it seems to me with a lot of the same participants that were there just prior to World War II, well, the early part of the 20th century. They're all there again: Japan, China, United States, Britain, and they're all playing their share in a kind of reenactment for power in the Western Pacific. But I'm really not paying attention, so I don't know that much. I know that China builds offshore islands in the East China Sea and the South China Sea, and she turns them into military bases and who knows what else, But when you're as big as her, you could do whatever you want, and everybody else has to try to accommodate. But anyway, that's away from history. That's current events. But history that I'm talking about in Singapore and the Brits, a critical aspect of why the war in the Pacific became the war in the Pacific. And it's clear to me that Japan absolutely was desirous of eating up all of that Southeast Asia and the Southeast Asian archipelago. There was a very important resource in Malaysia, Malay, tin. And tin is also important in the discussion about Britain. So, what going on in Singapore, and going on in Singapore, let me talk a little bit about the two paintings on my piano. The first one to my left is, of course, nothing to do with Singapore, but it's my rendition of Joan of Arc, who is dressed in armor, as you can see. And she so loved her sovereign that she was willing to go fight for him. And she led armies and what have you against the English, although they may have been called the Normans. And in the 1400s she was doing this. And this sheds some light on the British Islands. But I will start with the British Islands at a much earlier time. But I am making it a habit of putting paintings up there. And because these are smaller paintings, the two that are up there, the other one does have some relevance to what we're talking about, because it's called Singapore Lady. And why is it called Singapore Lady? Because an individual, almost without saying the most important individual in the early phases of British Singapore, talk about 1800. Okay, this fellow was Sir Thomas Stanford Raffles, and Raffles was instrumental in creating the modern environment of Singapore. He came to Singapore. His background was very poor background in England, and he self-educated a bit, enough to get him a job with the company, and the company would be the EIC, East India Company. Got himself a job as a clerk, probably standing up all day in front of a desk, copying stuff. And then he was very good, and he got promoted, and eventually they said, let's send old Raffles out to the colonies. And so they sent him out there, and he wound up, I believe, first of all in Sumatra, I believe. Or he could have wound up in Malaysia. But anyway, he looked across the straits, and he thought that there was a very good opportunity. But by now, he's already a man who's somewhat in charge over there. Young, but very very capable. And he goes over there, and he sees the island, which at the time, the island wasn't called Singapore. Wow. It was called more like something like Temask, Tamask. And it's a name that goes back quite a few hundred years. And people will tell you what they think it was supposed to mean, but it means something like a place where the water's surrounded and what have you. So somehow he's talking to somebody, and they say that Singapore is the place where the lion comes from. Well, there's no lions in that part of the country. There are, on the other hand, tigers. So the person was probably talking about a tiger. So it would have been called something else, whatever the word is for tiger. But this is Singapore, has to do with the lions come out. Now, so he goes and he starts a colony there. And the reason why I got this painting out there, because I came across a picture of his second wife, Sophie. Quite an attractive young lady. And Sophie had her hair set up like that, all the way on the side. You see this? That's the way Sophie decked herself out. Now, her face didn't look like that, but I had recently made this painting, and I saw the picture in a book, and I said, hey, this is Sophie. So that's the story behind these two paintings. But anyway, getting back to Raffles, he's in Singapore probably for like 15 years. He does a lot of the early development. He does a lot of the laying out of the city's plot. And I can't say for sure if he was still around, but they built something called the Raffles Hotel. And that place is still around, and it's still pretty much known for its elegance. And you go there, you stay there. You're like back in the colonial days. Not that people want to be back in the colonial days. Of course, modern people they don't want to be that, because imperialism is a terrible word. And so Singapore, when they got there, it was nothing but jungle, woods, forest, mango, swamps, and all that stuff. So they had to clear all of that. And the idea of rubber was now getting popular. And I'm pretty sure they did rubber plantations. But eventually, via chopping down all the trees and then draining all the swamps to build a city, once again, a place was impacted extremely negatively due to development and humans' unsatiable desire for land and resources and what have you. Now, this area comes into play with why the war in the Pacific became the war in the Pacific, because, like I said, Japan wanted this place, wanted it big time, and it had already set up its war plans way in advance, and of course, while Washington and Tokyo were hemming and hawing and making like they were in discussions for how to come to a peaceful settlement of their issues. Number one, December 7th, Japan attacks Pearl Harbor, destroying the American fleet. Number two, December 8th, Japan invades Malaysia, and in a few days, they're knocking on the door in Singapore, and they take that over too. And at the time, the Brits and the Japanese were in discussions trying to forestall war. They were going to forestall it because they didn't know the Asian mind, and so they were hook-winked. And unfortunately, the newest, the greatest, the biggest, the largest, the bestest battleship of the British Empire, the Prince of Wales, had been steaming offshore, I think possibly en route to Singapore, along with another ship, I think the Redoubt, whatever. But it was what they call a dreadnought, probably referring to a very old battleship from World War I, large, big things. And the Japanese fighters, airplanes, what have you, attacked them and sunk both of them in no time at all. So Japan attacked that section of the world, Malaysia, Singapore, and all the places around there. And in no time at all, they had put them in the ground. So what were these discussions that were going on? They weren't discussions. They were being hook-winked by the Japanese. So that started. Now, let me say right in the beginning, unlike the war in Europe that went on for a long time, this little thing was a blip. Lots of people died. I'm sorry to say that it was a blip. But Japan only held sway there for about a couple of years. That was 1941. By 1942, 43, they were swept out of there. So that was a great, grievous mistake by Japan. Anyway, and it was all about resources. They wanted the resources of the British colonies, and they wanted the resources of the Dutch colonies. And it was tin, it was rubber, it was oil, and people. And Japan got her way for a little while, but not enough to make it made it worth it. No way. But the price they paid, they should have went back to the drawing board in 1937 and said, look, this taking over China isn't all that easy. Why don't we quit while we're ahead? But they didn't. Arrogance, greed, superiority complexes, all over the place. Give me a break. But so that's why I wanted to bring in Singapore at this time, because it's very British historically, although not anymore. I mean, it definitely has its British influences still, particularly in the commercial sector. And Singapore, early on in its history, even before Europeans got there, it was very central to commerce, world commerce, because if you look at it, it's situated in a place where if you go this way, you're going towards India, Arabia, and then up and up to Europe and the world in that direction. If you go the other way, you're going towards Southeast Asia, China, the Pacific Islands, New Zealand, Australia, and it was right there in the middle. And no wonder they call it the gateway to the East. Very sheltered from from being battered by the Indian Ocean and or the Pacific Ocean. It's very sheltered. It's about 150 miles above the equator, so it's hot, no doubt. And it had the advantage of being able to work the monsoons to its advantage. In other words, certain parts of the year you sailed west. You hung around a port for 2 months, and then you sailed back home east, or vice versa, wherever you were coming from. The monsoons were like a great big engine until the steamship came. And the steamship came and people could ride the steamships. And just a little side note, in Joseph Conrad's famous short novel, Lord Jim. It's one of those steamboats early on, steamships, that Muslim pilgrims were headed west had to have pilgrimage to Mecca. Every Muslim was expected to go to Mecca once in their life. So they were all hoarded onto this steamship. And that's the steamship that went down off the southern tip of Arabia. And Joe Conrad, the character of Lord Jim, not Joe Conrad, the character of Lord Jim, is one of the young officers, and they abandoned the ship and their passengers, thinking they're going to go down and nobody's ever going to know what they did. But the steamship did not go down. It came into the port with all the reports about the atrocities that the officers of that ship did. So, in fact, though, they were kind of cleared, at least Lord Jim, they were kind of cleared of serious wrongdoing, but he had to live the rest of his life kind of hating himself for what he did and trying to hide from the general population. That's why he winds up somewhere in the hinterlands, up some river where nobody would know him or find him. And that's the story of Lord Jim. Great story. You got to read it when you're young, though. You could read it when you're older too. I mean, really, anything by Conrad is excellent, except for that one Nostradamus. I always found that hard to take, but he was stepping out into a different genre, so he had some difficulties with that. Anyway, I think I'm going to say enough about Sumatra and that part of the world. Could always come back, but getting into early England and Ireland, the British Isles. I want to, the prehistory of that area goes back 3, 4, 5,000 years, who knows? But the first great people that come to our attention somewhere in the first millennium BC, before the Common Era. And those were the Celtics. And they are an interesting people, of course they are, but prior to that, there've been numerous other folks, and once again, these had to be prehistorics because they didn't leave any written evidence of them being there, but they were there. The archaeologists have all this stuff, the Stonehenge-like ceremonial places, the pottery, weapons, and also knowledge from other seafaring areas of the early world who had made trips up out of Gibraltar. I wanted to say the Pillars of Hercules that they sailed through, but I'm not absolutely sure that that's the Pillars of Hercules. But they sailed through Gibraltar. They sailed up the coast. They also sailed down the coast. But they had stories to tell of the people who lived up there. But one of the people who immediately preceded the Celtics were people referred to as the Beaker folks. And that's because of their distinct type of pottery. And supposedly they're very, very well designed and well created. So we have them, but then over time, these Celtic people who were in Galatia, or maybe not yet in Galatia, but were certainly in the parts of Europe that today we would think of as Ukraine. And they started a slow, gradual movement towards the West. And people, the historians and the people who know this stuff, think that they were always on the lookout for tin. There was tin in that Ukrainian area, and tin was their meat and potatoes. Because with tin, they can alloy it with copper, and they came up with bronze. And bronze is a very hard substance. You can put a really good sharp edge on it. You can use it well in battle. You could also use it to deforest any forest you care to deforest, and it would be easier. And actually, it's thought that as they spread, they brought this tin and the making of bronze to the British Islands. And I think they came up through Ireland first, and that caught on. And I'm pretty sure that with these now better made axes, they were able to clear the forests in England, the English island. And that was important more so than in Ireland, because a lot of Ireland was, marshy and not very, stout forest. But England had true forest. And I always used to wonder, you see these lovely pictures of the English countryside, and I said, boy, how did those meadows get like that? Look at this, there's no trees. Well, it started back in the first millennium BC with the well-made bronze axes of the Celtic people. And so what it looks like was a gradual creep. It wasn't a mass invasion of the Celtic folks across the channel. No, it was a gradual creep. And what's extremely interesting to me, that the last ice age ended, look, the last ice age is given at 10,000 years ago. So over a period of not long geologically speaking, say a couple of thousand years, the melting of the retreating ice and the shaking and breaking of the land because of that retreating ice created the English Channel and other waterways down on the other side that poured between England and Ireland. So as the Ice Age retreated, the people who were living on the, say, the east side of what is now the English Channel, they started to see an opportunity for easier crossing, easier marching across the marshlands from what is now France over to England, and then eventually using boats to make it even easier to get to the other side. And this they did, but it was a gradual creep. We don't see like the archaeologists, the historians, they see a gradual blending of the new folks, the Celtics, the Celtics, and the people who were there. And they see that now, and this is being used all the time, using genetics. So it wasn't like these folks came across from France and killed everybody and took over. No, they came, they blended, they stayed. But except for Caesar, because they say, Caesar said, I came, I saw, I conquered. No, he should have said, I came, I saw, and I left. But the point is that it was gradual. They they stayed. They liked what they saw. They made communities. They did this. Then the Romans came and they fought and all that stuff. And of course, the Celtics didn't have the weaponry or the military strategy that the Romans had. So the Romans were always capable of winning those battles. But in the long run, via attrition and just, how can I keep up with this? How can I keep my supply lines going? They had to leave. They got out of there. And this is all going on over, a very long period of time. And the people, now we start, after that period, we start to become more involved in true history, and names start jumping up at us that we recognize. Before I go there, I just want to say that the Julius Caesar and his folks came across some people, and they referred to them as the Picts, P-I-C-T-S, something like that. And I've taken from that they were the painted people. And why he called them that is because these warriors on the British island used to paint themselves with something from a plant called woad, W-O-A-D. And W-O-A-D, woad, they would ferment it, dry it out, ferment it, and they got themselves a bluish dye, and they painted themselves with that. And they did that for hundreds of years, and they became known as the painted people, which is why when you see some of these fantastic Hollywood movies about the ancient folk and barbarians, they're blue. At least I'm assuming that because somebody told them, oh, paint those guys blue because they were blue back then. So they did, and they got the name, and some refer to the islands as the Painted Islands. So, listen, I'm going to wrap it up. We started a tiny discussion about England and the British Islands and Western Europe. We know that the Celtics came from an area south of Ukraine, right in that area. They also spread out to places south of the Black Sea. Their influence went that way, but their major migration was from Ukraine west and a little down too, because they wind up in northwest Spain, which is also referred to as Galatia. The place in Ukraine is referred to as Galatia. So you got two of these Galatias. Which reminds me, I forgot I was going to bring a bottle of wine that I got from that area of Spain. It's a white wine. Grape is local to that area. And it's a pretty decent wine. But I forgot to bring it. I would show it to you. I didn't have it. Okay. Wouldn't it be great if I could say, anybody have any questions? And then we could talk about the questions. So, just seeing if there's anything else I wanted to say. Do I have apples? No. Well, nice talking to you today. Hope to see you sometime soon. By the way, I was putting up a video of the sun, the morning sun, sweeping across my globe. See my globe here? Sweeping across my globe. Just a short sector of the globe, but it was the sector of Central Asia and the Himalayas. And as the sun swept over it, it illuminated the higher point. This is a bas relief globe. You know what that means? It's a little high. Geography. Where it's high, it's high. Where it's low, it's low. But the sun would illuminate. Let's just talk about the Himalayas. It illuminate one side of the Himalayas, and the other side would be in deep shadow, but the sun kept moving, and then it kept illuminating the Himalayas more and more, and then down the other side, and so on and so forth. So I had a lot of trouble with that at first, but I redid it early today, and I put it up, and it's up there. I'm pretty sure it's up there. So if you want to see the sun rising over the world, just go look at my video. It's obviously not the world, but you get the idea in it. The first one I did was like 44 minutes long, and I'm telling you, it was absolutely spellbinding. It was absolutely gorgeous. This one I did this morning is not. The circumstances weren't the same, and so on and so forth. But I didn't get rid of that first one. Somehow I'm going to have to figure out the technical difficulty. Basically, I think that the format on the hard drive on the cell phone is incomprehensible to what I was trying to offload it to. Incomprehensible. You remember those days, DOS, formatting this and all that stuff, and then putting bytes, and it couldn't be all that fragmented. If it's too fragmented, you would do a defrag, and it would make it a little more concise. The block of data, and the other equipment could deal with it. I think that's what my problem is there, because this thing I did today was much shorter, probably in a smaller part of the hard drive of the cell phone, and so on and so forth. But those days are over. When was the last time you typed defrag? All right, have a nice day. I'll come back and talk to you. I might do a piano video today.